more book recommendations for you. Some of you, I know it's kind of a strange time in the year to talk about a devotional, but this is a very edifying devotional book on the tables outside, Things Unseen, 1 year of reflections on the Christian life by Sinclair Ferguson. Some of you have probably benefited from Sinclair Ferguson's podcast by the same title, and this is a collection of devotional thoughts. So it's available. There's still, I think, a good number of copies on the table outside. So grab that if you perhaps need some help in devotional study in life. I've got a couple more books. One of them is The Character of Christ, nice little short book by Jonathan Landry Cruz. Another book on worship, what happens when we worship. We're hearing from Pastor Miller this week, who's a minister in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. Jonathan Cruz is a fellow minister in the OPC as well, faithful man. And these are both very good books that there's plenty of copies out there yet, and they would be helpful to you. One, again, refocusing our gaze on Christ in public worship, and then the other one, growing in the fruit of the Spirit. So a few titles for you: Things Unseen by Sinclair Ferguson, and then What Happens When We Worship, and The Character of Christ by Jonathan Landry Cruz. So visit the book table after this session. And with no further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Thomas. Welcome him for yet another session. Very good.
Well, how sweet of you. I'm glad you came back. For this is my last session. Frowny face. But I had already signed up for this triathlon, and I've got to go back to do that in Waco. So tonight is our last night. I'll be here for the Q&A. By the way, what that means is bookstore shutting down tonight. So if you want to grab any of our materials, this is the day to do it. Or if you want to ask me, as my friends and neighbors say, ask me a question, today's the day to get that done as well. Questions about dinosaurs is what I know the most about, I think. Mostly the proteins in them, not really the shapes of the bones. I'm not an anatomist. But boy, did I enjoy discovering these 5 particular details. Because you remember when I first met you, I described this 8-year gap, this 8-year time span between when I first met Christ and then I was layered with all these teachings from the world, worldly teachings that taught dinosaurs evolved into birds, dinosaurs evolved from some sort of other reptile, dinosaurs evolved over millions of years, tens of millions of years, and scientists have proven it. And the whole time I'm learning this and hearing this from TV, from my teachers, from my parents, from textbooks, from movies. That's the most effective means of teaching, is just by learning and absorbing when your brain is turned off. Movies are dangerous. Turn your brains on, I wish. And I told my kids that. In fact, I would stop the TV right in the middle of the show. Did you hear what they just said? Dad, the guy's about to kill the other guy. Turn the movie back on. Think about this, kids. And now, years later, they come back and they say, Dad, I'm glad you did that. Because they recognize their friends haven't been critically thinking. And so, but we did have fun and did some thinking as well at the same time. Because I wanted my kids to know these 5 dinosaur details, which would have made all the difference during those 8 years, during which time I would not have spent doubting God, doubting God's word, and generally speaking, living for myself instead of for Him. Once I realized God's word is true, once I realized it's all about Him, then I began to give myself to Him, give my life to Him. I've been trying to practice that every day since then. So, are you pumped up about the 5 dinosaur details? Yes! Detail numero uno. Clever design. 5 dinosaur details. I wish I knew this one, because according to evolutionary ideas, we should expect to see in the fossils partly formed, half-formed evolutionary experiments. Nature experimenting on lizards to try to turn them into whatever nature is supposedly doing, natural processes, blah, blah, blah. and we should see misshapen dino bits. But we don't. We see these dinosaurs are fully formed right from the start as soon as we see them in these layers. All the, what we know most about their anatomy is, of course, their skeletal anatomy. We know some about the other soft tissue stuff as well by inference, and in some cases by direct observation, as we mentioned yesterday. But we see evidence of clever design everywhere we look with these creatures. Here's me at the Denver Museum taking multiple photos from one position and try to cobble them together. This thing is so big, you have to take like multi-photos and pinch them together in order to just get it all in frame. Anyway, so this is, we're going to say dino names this afternoon, if you don't mind. This is Diplodocus. Diplodocus. And so, wow. Long neck, long tail. So whoever crafted this had to have solved the same engineering dilemma that airplane designers solved. Orville and Wilbur Wright figured this one out, 1904, I think. And what is it? It's the cantilevered boom. Cantilevered boom, and we use this with cranes today, man-made cranes. And in other words, you have to make this suspended without a lot of effort. And so there's cables called ligaments that extend along the spine, the cervical vertebrae, and then the caudal vertebrae. Anyway, neck and then tail. And so, would you get on an airplane if the vertebrae were made, if the airplane wings were made of cinder blocks? No, because you're smart. I wouldn't either. And so the Lord Jesus crafted these with lightweight, weight-saving features, as well as strong places where it needed to be strong. He reinforced it with places in the bone that are super reinforced. He even has an arch between his front legs and back legs, and it serves the same purpose in his body as do arches today, with pillars in between them. And we see arches in this ancient 2,000-year-old Roman aqueduct. And we look at that and we instantly say to ourselves, it's right over the river, so obviously water erosion carved these arches so that they naturally laid out right where they are. Not at all. The Romans did this, and if you look really close, you can see little people walking across the aqueduct there, and it's still in place. I think. Well, anyway. Now imagine this. You look at this and you go, someone put it there. It's intuitive, and let me reinforce that intuition. You're thinking well. You're thinking rightly. This is part of what it means in Romans 1:20 when God said, "For my invisible qualities," well, Paul said, "for his invisible qualities are clearly seen." How? They've been clearly seen since when? Since the beginning of creation, when there were people to see it at the beginning of creation, not Big Bang years after not billions of years after that. People have been clearly seeing God's invisible qualities. Through what? Through that which he has made. So this is obviously made, but now imagine making one of these where the pillars are mobile and they can just walk around. A bridge that maybe can pick itself up and walk over to another place. That's what we have with these sauropod dinosaurs. In effect, you have pillars and arches, but these are mobile. Wow. And you have these long neck, long tail, and the vertebrae you can see on Diplodocus has these raised ridges. It even had hollowed out spaces on the inside of the bones as well to make them lighter and lighter weight. And in fact, the density of these bones themselves got less and less dense as you go from the body trunk all the way out to the head. So the very last vertebra, right behind the cranium, is the same density, we think, as styrofoam is today. He even had a super lightweight head. Can you imagine sticking a T-Rex head on the end of this neck? How would he do? How would he fare? Not well at all. He'd be eating worms all the time, I guess. So no, he's got a lightweight head with a teeny tiny brain even. The brain the size of a walnut, but it's not the size of the brain that matters. It's the wiring diagram that's inside. And apparently he had plenty of wiring to do everything he needed to do. It reminds me of the lightweight, the weight-saving features, yet strength-giving features that I have in my bicycle that I'll be riding this weekend, Lord willing. With the open air, the gaps in the chain ring and the hollowed tubes. And so these creatures had those kinds of features as well. Really cleverly designed, clever design. Well, I even saw the placard at the Field Museum in Chicago. And it says this about sauropods. What are sauropods? They're the long neck, long tail dinosaurs. The biggest land creature that ever walked the earth. Some of these, this one that's jacked up in the front is Brachiosaur. You just saw Diplodocus, which his hips are the highest point in his body, so jacked up in the back. But anyway, either way, they were engineered for size. You have to have a certain minimum number of engineering features in order to be a sauropod, in order to have lived like this. You have to have those lightweight vertebrae. You have to have pillar-like legs. It even had this thing where as its body grew, the thickness of its knee joint expanded to support the extra weight of its body, 30 tons. And the Diplodocus could take and rear up on its back legs using its tail as a tripod and plant that tail about 1/3 of the way out from the body trunk. Its tail has these little platforms. That's what gives it its name. Diplodocus refers to this die or fork aspect to the extensions from its vertebrae. Anyway, he could rear up on his hind legs and stretch that neck 40 feet up in the air to grab and to perhaps strip tree branches of their leaves. Engineered all the way. And these guys, these evolutionists, these nature worshipers like I was, they admitted it. You know what this sign says to me? It is clearly seen. It's clearly seen that they were engineered. Now, who would you think that if you were to ask them, okay, if it's engineered, who did the engineering? What do you think they'd say? Nature, natural processes, natural this, natural that. But that's not because of the evidence. That's not because of the science. It's because of this resistance to anything supernatural. Because if we allow a divine foot in the door, then we might feel like we're accountable for our sins, and we have to give an account on Judgment Day to a holy God. Yikes. And it is a scary thought, and it should scare us. But that's what we have. We have a world who's either running away from the Lord or running toward the Lord, and it's up to us to be equipped to ask the questions, to have the heart for people to say, which direction are you headed? Is it reasonable to attribute the engineering that's clearly seen to a non-engineer? No more reasonable than it is to attribute, let's say, a piece of art or a work of art to not an artist. Nature does that too. Wow, nature has a lot of attributes. Or coding. We talked about DNA. It's an instruction code. It's not a product of the physical material upon which it resides. It's imposed upon the physical material on which it resides. And it doesn't take up space or have mass, and yet it exists. It's called information. And there it is. The information to build out these dinosaurs was in their DNA, as it is in creatures today. Cleverly designed features we can infer and we can see. Well, here's another cleverly designed aspect. It has nothing to do with me. But I'm holding a hadrosaur egg, and it's from China. And what happened? So what does this tell us? This tells us, and I'm next to a hadrosaur, duck-billed dinosaur. Everybody say hadrosaur? Very good. So duck-billed dinosaurs, there's a whole variety of them, but many of them are just varieties of the same basic kind, duck-bill. And it didn't have a duck's bill. It just had a mouth bone shaped like a duck's bill, so we call them duck-billed dinosaurs. Anyway, even the 40-foot-long duckbills, they came from eggs this size, smaller than a football, which means what? He hatches out, he takes pieces of his environment, and he grows, develops, and then can make a copy of himself. She makes copies of herself. They make copies of themselves. Now, this is unheard of. This is, have you ever heard of von Neumann machine? Look it up. It's a clever exercise. It lets us know, yeah, humans can cleverly design artifacts and computers and whatnot, but can you make a computer that can itself take elements from its environment and build a copy of itself? It's a degree and level of engineering that humans haven't even approached. So therefore, we should have been giving credit to God all along, just like Genesis says. So when I learned this first dinosaur detail, these dinosaurs are all really, really well put together. Someone must have done that. Then I got back to Genesis, and it says, and God made, not, and nature made. Or I had one guy come up after a presentation. I heard that you said that dinosaurs got on the ark. He had very furrowed eyebrows, and I agree with you that God made that God made the world, but I don't think that he made the dinosaurs. Well, then, who do you think made them? Was it natural processes like the world believes? No, I believe Satan made the dinosaurs. And so what do I ask? I ask the question, what led you to that conclusion? Because I want to know. And then he said, well, there's an article on the internet. And so, well, can you share with me this article? I want to learn. And I looked up this article, and it's an article on the internet. And it has nothing to do with the reality of the anatomy that we know from these cleverly designed beasts of the earth. Created on day 6. Yeah, day 6. And then right before he made Adam and Eve on that same day. Second, dinosaur detail. I wish I knew, and I'm glad that you get to know, has to do with catastrophic death. So the first was clever design, which fits the idea of divine creation by God on purpose, okay, with intent. All those aspects that even today's human designers execute when we build stuff, especially cool stuff. And then the second is catastrophic death, in contrast to what we read and see in museum placards, what we see and read in books. Catastrophic, not calm. Okay, that's my point on this. We're told calm, stories about calmness. No. I don't see evidence of calm when these creatures died. I see evidence of catastrophe. Well, here's a dinosaur on display. It's actually on display at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, but it was excavated from Dinosaur National Monument in Utah, where I was just a few weeks ago. So I got to see the site where this was excavated from, and but that's years after I saw where it was on display. Well, it's a subject of interest, even 100 years after it was put on display, toted by train, this big thing, across the nation to Pittsburgh. Scientists have been studying it ever since. And it's a small sauropod called Camarasaurus. What to say about Camarasaurus? Well, first thing to look at is there were some scientists looking at this after. By the way, it's rare to see the head of any dinosaur, especially a sauropod dinosaur, associated with the rest of the carcass. Very, very commonly, the head has been ripped off. The tip of the tail has been toted off. The toes and lower legs have been ripped off. And basically, what you end up with is a body core, which has some ribs, and the middle of its body, it's like this creature was dismembered as it was floating down a fast-moving mud slurry. And so it's rare to find these pretty much intact, like this was found here. Wow. But there's something a little bit odd about his head position. He's got a chin-down look to him. What do you think? Do you think this is how he usually walked around? Maybe like that? Well, some scientists did a study, and they analyzed the position of all the elements and pieces of the vertebrae that were that right behind his head. And this is what they said. There's my photo of it up close. You can see it's kind of a chin-down type of thing. Is it normal for his head to be in this position? And here's what they said. The post-mortem dorsiflexion disarticulated the zygapophyses such that it was preserved in a pose that was unlikely attainable in life. And I was like, everybody knows that. Duh. Tell me something I don't know. And then I got a dictionary and looked up every word and translated. So it says, after it died, its neck broke. Just say that, people. Just say that. No, you have to make it sound fancy. Calm or catastrophic? Broken neck. Catastrophic, yeah. Well, let's consult the all-important and all-authoritative National Geographic family book on dinosaurs. And it's talking about a small turkey-sized dinosaur called, everybody say Compsognathus? Compsognathus, very good. And what do they tell us about Compsognathus? Compsognathus lived close to the shore of a calm lake. Not catastrophic, calm. How do they know? Were they there? Just because they have white lab coats, does that mean they were there and they know? I mean, I have a white lab coat, and I don't know. I wasn't there. But I see evidence of catastrophe and not calmness. By the way, have you seen a calm lake in Tennessee or wherever you're from? Calm lakes? Yes. Okay, calm lakes. Good. And then in the calm lake, when a creature dies, let's say a fishy dies, sad fishy, does he turn into a fossil in the bottom of a calm lake? How do you know? Are you there? Yes, you are. You can check it out. So when I was your age, I tested this, but I didn't know I was testing it. And I was a summer camp counselor in Alabama, and we did canoeing. And so we were canoeing in the backwaters of a river where it's nice and calm. And the guy in the front of the canoe, he would dig his paddle down into the muck at the bottom of the calm lake, calm waters, and he would stir up that sulfurous muck, and then these sulfur bubbles would come up. And just about the time our canoe went over the water, the sulfur would hit my nose. And I would say, stop it. So I would splash him with some paddle water. It was great fun. Stir it up, stop it, stir it up, stop it. Guess what that meant? Froggy dies, fishy dies. No fossils are forming in the calm lakes. They get eaten and then they rot. That's what happens today in lakes, streams, rivers, oceans, backwater, front water, side water, land. Creatures get scavenged and they rot. Even a whale, a 95-foot-long whale, gets completely recycled, all the nutrients of its body, in just a few years. And there are even special creatures that eat whale bone. No one knows how these creatures scan the oceans and zoom in on those whale carcasses and find them, and then eat the bone with their special bone-eating techniques. And it's completely gone. So even giant whales are not forming fossils. So fossil-forming recipe, catastrophe. You got to cover it quick, got to cover it deep. Even little dinos like Compsognathus. So I took a look at some actual Compsognathids. On the left is Compsognathus. This one excavated from Europe. And then on the right, it's anatomically identical, this little dino. But since it was discovered in China, they had to name it something different for fame, funding, and glory. So they named it Sinosauropteryx. Say that. You guys are such great students. Because you're thinking critically, and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I could see. The calm waters calmly ensured that the head was smashed against its pelvis. Very calm. Calm down, we know. We were there. Oh, so I'm at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana, and there on display is this little guy. If you want to say it, it's Tenontosaurus. And he suffered an agonizing death. Finally, a placard says something that's like, maybe it's kind of like right on track. Like, it wasn't calm, it was catastrophic and agonizing. Yes, I agree. And if you read the fine print on the placard that accompanies this fossil in its plaster jacket, showing you its in situation there with its neck arched back. And by the way, that's how we see anything with a long neck, whether it's a bird in the same layers as dinos, or even in layers above those where you have hard ground living creatures like fossilized camels. Their necks are arched back as well. Necks arched back all over the fossil record. And so what is causing this? And they did a study with chickens. And they took chickens and they killed them and they put them in mud. And then they dug out the mud and they found that don't squint your nose. You love chicken. It's delicious. She's like, I'm a vegetarian. Aren't chickens delicious? Yes. Okay, sad that chickens have to die in order for me to feel satisfied. But this is how scientists go. This is the science we must do. So they peeled away the mud, and sure enough, the chickens had choked. This is a choking posture, choking on that mud, necks arched back, trying to get a breath, but they're pulling in mud instead. That may be why he suffered an agonizing death. I mean, he's surrounded by mud that soon turned to stone upon drying out. But what it said was he was probably choking. This is a choking posture. I'm like, yes. And then I kept reading, and it says, probably because a predatory dinosaur was clamped on its neck. Does anyone see the predatory dinosaur clamped on its neck? Not there. But if we admit that this guy died by choking on the mud that surrounds him, then we have to admit that all these other creatures around the world with necks arched back also were choking on mud. Then we'd have a global watery catastrophe of biblical proportions, and that's way too close to my heart. Because that means God judged the world because of its sin, just like the Bible said. And I don't want that to be part of my worldview. Well, let's go to another dino. This is probably the world's most famous single dinosaur specimen, nicknamed Sue, the T-Rex, named after the discoverer, Sue Hendrickson. They call her a she, but who knows what the gender is? I don't know. They don't know, but we, nicknamed Sue. So anyway, on the top left, we have all the bones have been recast, and it's an exact replica, and all the bones, however, have been repositioned into life position. I think the bones are well done. I think they did a great job. And in the bottom, we have Sue's actual head in a giant glass case so that we can investigate. This is Sue. And so I'm looking at Sue, and there's something different about the model and the bones in life position versus the bones. Hey, my mouth shows up. So we have this little dent here. So somehow her head was dented, and then the nose is broken there. So there's some pieces that are a little bit off, and it turns out that these two people pictured in my photo that just happened to be there, sorry for them, but they're reading a placard that explains these differences. Would you like to read it with me? I know you would because I've invited you to. But what I don't understand is how they're reading this with a straight face, because this is what it says, crushed nose. Okay, when Sue was found, her pelvis, that's this part down here, was resting on top of her snout. Okay. Though it may sound odd that this giant creature was turned into a pretzel, discovering a theropod dinosaur in this death pose is surprisingly common. Oh, that means it's even more odd, because it's weird there, and now it's weirder that it's here and over there. This pose may be caused by what? Muscle spasms. I know. It's common. It's just calm down. We know what happened after death. These creatures had muscle spasms, and it happens to me. I get muscle spasms, and in the morning, it puts my pelvis and crushes my nose, and I have to go to the chiropractor, and can you straighten me out? And I don't want to make light of my colleagues who have done a lot of research on this. I just did make light of my colleagues who did research on this, but I will grant, of course, that there are instances where the tendons tighten up after death and it tends to move the bones around after the animals die. But this much, not this much, not to crush the head and to turn it into a pretzel. But these guys were crushed and pretzeled and completely inundated by sediment. Wherever you find them on display across the nation and the world, T-Rex is here, T-Rex is there, 6 tons of I can go anywhere. Except they couldn't get past this mud. This mud overwhelmed them. It was so catastrophic they couldn't run fast enough to get away, they couldn't swim fast enough to get away, and after they recovered, they couldn't bulldoze their way out of the way fast enough. They got completely covered in mud. Calm or catastrophic? I'm saying mega catastrophe, and it fits what we should expect to see if Noah's flood explains the fossils. If we had a worldwide flood, and Peter says this about the flood, 2 Peter 3:6, the world that then existed perished, being overflowed with water. 2 Peter 3:6. I think Peter is telling his readers, get back to building your thinking on what the prophets and the apostles told us happened from the very beginning. He says that in verse 1 or 2 of chapter 3. And so here we have another verse, Genesis 7:19 and 20. Says this about Noah's flood, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. Now, class, these are the high hills that existed at that time, which were not as tall as the Himalayas or the Rockies. The Himalayas and the Rockies are part of this world, not that world that perished, but this world. In fact, the flood itself, I think, took the one single landmass, broke it into continents, smashing those continents into one another, some pieces diving under and under the mantle. So we have lots of tectonic activity. We call it continental sprint, not continental drift. We have a detailed model that explains this, and we're constantly refining it, working on it. But the waters prevailed, and all flesh died that moved on the earth. I think these creatures probably moved on the earth. There's another There's the verse that I told you last night that says they had the breath of life in their nostrils, so that means they would have gone on the ark. What happened to them after they got off the ark? Have creatures gone extinct after they got off the ark? Homing pigeon, dodo bird, they used to be alive, now they're not. Many dinosaurs may have suffered similar fates. Where would we look for evidence to see if these creatures lived after the flood? Well, I wouldn't look in the fossils, because those are largely a record, if you will, stretching the term beyond its literal usage, a record of catastrophic death from Noah's flood. And so we need to look at our ancestors' writings, our ancestors' artwork, and what those folks said about the world they lived in. They know more about their world than we do sometimes, because they were actually there. And in fact, we see in the King James Bible, 1611, straight from heaven, they used the word dragon several times to translate the Hebrew tanin. And maybe they had something in mind when they used that word, dragon. So we have clashes with dragons as a possible evidence, string of evidences that are that these creatures lived for some time after the flood. Well, let's just get your appetite whetted with some mediocre artifacts, and then we'll go to more specific and more convincing artifacts that suggest more and more strongly, I think, that our ancestors did in fact encounter some now extinct creatures. This is an Uruk cylinder seal from Mesopotamia, and they would roll this thing across a piece of clay. It's on display at the Louvre in Paris. And I told my wife, okay, sweetheart, when you go to Paris, make sure you go to the Louvre and snap a picture of this artifact. I want to see, because it's got these legs straight down, long necks intertwined. And she got to the Louvre on February something of 2000, and they said, due to the COVID, we are now shutting down. Wait, that's German. Due to COVID, we're now shutting down. We are now shutting down. And so they have cigarettes. I don't know why. So she's running through, weren't you? You're like running through. And so no time to take our photo of this artifact. But it's got the same feature of these legs straight down below the body and then long tails. This is interesting. We were together at Carlisle Cathedral in the north of the UK looking at this one. And we call it Bishop Bell's brass behemoths. And it's under a rug. We didn't know it was under a rug, but that's how they protect it. It's a brass decoration that adorns Bishop Bell's ancient tomb. How ancient? Early 1400s. He was interred there in the chapel floor. So, Pastor, upgrade. You could move from the cemetery to inside the chapel if you're a real bishop. And then people will walk on your grave for hundreds of years and wear it down. And that's what you see. It's kind of worn, but the necks are intertwined. And now on the guy on the left has tail spikes in the end of his tail. So these are kind of like sauropod dinosaurs, I think. But are there any sauropod dinosaurs with tail spikes that we know of from the fossil record? It turns out the answer is yes. There's a couple, and there's one sauropod. Well, the first one was discovered in the 1990s, and they pulled it out of the ground. And by the way, its name, if you want to say it, is Shunosaurus. Shunosaurus. And they pulled it out of the ground, and they said, look, there's 4 tail spikes here, and 4, count them. Yep, definitely. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so it's a match anatomically. Speaking of anatomy, when we're looking for dinosaur anatomy, we can distinguish that from other reptiles, even modern reptiles' anatomies, by the way their hips. Dinosaur hips are unique. Their hips are kind of more like us than like other reptiles. And in order for you to understand this, it's going to be necessary for you to demonstrate it. And that means you're going to have to stand up. So may I invite you to rise. Rise. Yes, just the stretch we needed. Okay, so to turn yourselves into lizards, you just have to remember that lizard appendages, their legs go out from the body and then down, so the ground is right in front of you. So elbow room, bump your neighbor. Out and then down, legs out and then down. Okay, so we're all lizard. Now, I'm going to demo this, and then you're going to replicate this movement, but As lizards or crocs, you have to waddle when you walk. Yes, you look great. Woo. Okay, good job. This is like the best audience I've ever had do this. It's fantastic. Okay, and then so now let's go dino. So we're going to be sauropod dino, and so we have our legs are going to be beneath us, not out to the side, beneath us, so we get to walk like this. Yeah. We could just do these for calisthenics, and we'd be actually better off for it. Okay, give yourselves a little hand. Good job. Sitting back down. Excellent. So when we see these artifacts, we're looking for the legs going straight down, and we see that with this Shunnosaurus look-alike. Legs going straight down, and this Narmer palate, really, really old, one of the earliest artifacts from ancient Egypt. I don't think it matches exactly anything we know from fossils, but it is intriguing, and it reminds us that the Egyptians had a word for an animal that they referred to as a real animal, and it's the exact cognate of the Hebrew word behemoth, and they would call it pimwa, and so they had that in their writing as well. So they referred to something. What was it? Well, let's go to France, back to français, oui. And on display at one of these castles in the Blois Valley, which was once swampy, a swampland. And this is a scene from the Blois Valley when it was a swamp, we think. Why did they drain the swamps? Well, the king in the 1700s, he wanted to make more farmable land, so he drained the swamps. People moved in, they started farming more, increase production. Now, this big creature with the scales doesn't match anything I know from fossils. It's just some sort of generalized medieval dragon-y type thing. And most of the artwork is like that. It's fanciful, like most today's dragon artwork is fancy. But the one on the right looks like a spitting image of a Maiasaura, a juvenile Maiasaura, which is a dinosaur we know from fossils. Isn't that cute? You could pet the baby Maiasaura and then feed it worms. And then when he grew big enough, you could feed it your brother. I think that's one reason why they don't have them around, because, I mean, if I'm dad and I got little Johnny running around and there's a swamp in the backyard, just like alligators today, we build fences and we stay out of the swamps, and there were monsters in them there swamps. And so, yeah, I would pull out my bow and arrow and get the guys together to have a hunt, and they'd bring out their AK-47s and get rid of that threat, just like the settlers did. We got rid of the bears that were in so many of these places. Bears all over the south of the United States. We even have a place called Bear Creek right next to our house, south of Dallas. There are no bears. The bears are long, long gone, 100 or more years ago. But the name stuck as a reminder that this place had bears in it. It had threatening creatures, and we removed those threats. Maybe this was a threatening creature as well, shown here on a Nile mosaic of Palestrina in Italy. So this is about 2,000 years old. So it was about 100 years old at the time of our Lord Jesus walking on earth. And it's a set of scenes from the Nile. And one of the scenes has the natives being restless and surrounding this tusked creature here. It doesn't match anything we know from dinosaur fossils, but it does match something that we know from a whole separate set or class of animals, all of which are gone. All the dinos are gone. People say, why just the dinos? It wasn't just the dinos. There's a whole class called the mammal-like reptiles. They're gone as well. They went extinct. This ice age happened after the flood, and habitats were lost as the ice age waned and as places dried up and as the ice melted back hundreds of years after the flood. You talk about climate change. Try having an ice age end on you. That's a mega climate change. And maybe the habitats left, and so the creatures had no more place to live. Anyway, it's crocodile-like and leopard-like. That's what the words there in Greek lettering with little tiny tiles sort of represent. And I think it looks somewhat like a creature we know from fossils called If you want to say it, it's gorgonopsid. Gorgonopsid. So good, look that one up if you want to. Now, the skeptics say, well, that can't possibly be a gorgonopsid because we know those from fossils that are 80, whatever the number is, tens of millions of years old. And those were therefore alive tens of millions of years before humans ever came on the scene at 3 million years old. How do you know it was 3 million? Because that's what it shows in the textbooks. How do you think they know? Because they're experts. Argument from authority. Trace it down. How do you know? And therefore they say it was probably some representation of, a crocodile. Except there's crocodiles already on there that look like crocodiles. So you be the judge. I'm not telling you what to believe. Now we go to Cambodia, and at Ta Prohm, there's a temple there. It's in the jungle, and we've got this water buffalo on top. There's a parrot above that. So these are some weird animals. And then some actual animals that were still there, but maybe there's remnants. This is the 1400s as well, so it's medieval in Europe was going on while this temple carving was happening there in Cambodia. And so it's got these plates along its back, and it's not an exact match by any means to, what do you think it looks like? Some of you saying steg, yeah, maybe, possibly. It's not an exact match, but it's close enough for us to be really intrigued and to really ask the question, what were they looking at? What was in their mind when they carved these things or when they made these beautiful artwork like this one on display in Barcelona, another medieval portrayal of St. George and the Dragon. And it turns out that each artist who portrayed St. George's dragon used a different dragon. What inspired their different dragons? And it may have been whatever dragons or large reptile they were familiar with in their area. That's one hypothesis that we should actually investigate instead of just dismissing outright. Let's look at the evidence first before we dismiss it. That's how we're supposed to do things, if we're open-minded about it. But look at this. On the right, we have a depiction by a paleo artist based on nothing but the fossils, having no knowledge of this piece of art. And what does it show? It's, I told you I would say, Nothosaurus is going to show up tomorrow, and here he is, Nothosaurus. And we saw the blood vessels from a Nothosaurus from Poland, and I showed you the pictures of that. Well, this is a Triassic reptile. So you see those legs that go out and then down? Not a dinosaur, okay? But it's an extinct semi-aquatic reptile with big teeth that go outside of its mouth. Very distinctive, characteristic, probably ate fish. And, but the thing is, the size and ratio and proportion of this in proportion to the horse and the man are exactly what the fossils show for Nothosaurus. You're supposed to say Nothosaurus. Very good. Clashes with dragons reminds us that, hey, maybe these creatures were alive for some time after the flood, and they've gone extinct since then, just like the dodo birds. And in fact, that would help us explain what God was talking about when he spoke with Job. After talking about specific animals that we know are still alive today, like the ostrich and the horse and the eagle and the etc., he gets to animal number 13 and he says, "Look, Job, look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. I made him right there on the same day that I made man, right along with you men, day 6 of creation. See now, his strength is in his hips. And he moves his tail like a cedar," talking about a tree. A tail like a tree? What animal has that? So, some conservative expositors have tried to figure this out, but there's really no anatomical match to the descriptions given in this passage in Job chapter 40, verses 15 and following. There's no match to a living creature. So, if you look at your translator's notes, it says behemoth. Follow the little letter A, bottom of the page says, possibly a hippopotamus. Okay? So I went to the Dallas Zoo to check out the hippos, and I wanted to see this tail in action. So after a long wait, the hippo finally came out of the water, but he only did so to relieve himself, and he used his tail as a fertilizer distributor device, and it was El Grosso. And I wish I could unhear what I heard. Complete with sound effects. But this flap-like tail with fur around it, it doesn't move like a cedar. It doesn't shape like a cedar. It's just funky little tail. And it got funkier as he used it in that way. And the fourth dinosaur detail, which I wish I knew, because I was taught when I was a little kid, I went to my first dino museum at 7, and I saw this big T-Rex in the front, and they said, I said, Mom, because my mom was with me, what is this? It's big and scary. And she said, let's ask the museum people. So my son has a question for you. What is that? That is a fossil. I don't care what you call it. Where did it come from, and why is it here, and why is it no longer here? That's what I wanted to know, even at age 6 or 7. And she said this, the museum lady, that's a fossil, and fossils formed over millions of years, just repeating what she's heard. And so we just repeat it because we heard it. And it gets baked into our brains and baked into our societies. And so let's critically challenge some of these things that are baked in. And like this, she said, and fossils are just rocks in the shape of a bone. Minerals have come in and replaced all the bone. So it's just rock in the shape of the bone. So we have the shapes of those bones, but it's all mineral, and there's no original biomaterials left at all. Fake news. So I showed you some of these images from yesterday, and this T-Rex, a femur. Point to your femur. You know what your femur is? Don't point to your neighbor's femur, your own femur. Yep. So it's the biggest bone in your body. Yes, excellent. And so they opened up the femur. Actually, the first one, this one, they had to open the femur because the sediment surrounding it was so heavy and it was on such a steep hillside that the team couldn't. It was too heavy for the helicopter to lift out. By the way, when we do excavations at the Institute for Creation Research, our budget is this big, and so we can't afford helicopters. So we would have to break the femur into lots of little bits in order to get out of the hillside. But they broke it in half, and they were able to helicopter out these chunks with femur and other bone bits in the chunks. Both, they thought, well, since the femur's already broken, let's look on the inside and see what may be in there. And they dissolved some of the bone away with acid, and this is what fell out of that femur. Now, this skull is the one that's associated with that skeleton that they excavated, nicknamed B-Rex, after the discoverer, Bob Harmon, who saw it poking out of the hillside of the Badlands of Montana. But look, blood vessels, check it out. Branching blood vessels still inside these bones. That's not a mineral. That's not rock in the shape of bone. That's a blood vessel inside of a bone. As we saw yesterday, I showed you that yesterday. We get to blast through these. What was this one? Do you remember? Mosasaurus, and it's got the bloody heart there we talked about. So it looks, and then my wife said today, she said, you kept saying it looks fresh on this continent, it looks fresh on that continent, but like how fresh is fresh? Because some of this doesn't look exactly fresh, and so how would it look if it was really fresh? And so I thought, that's a really good question. And then I look at these, and these are excavated, if you want to say Thoracosaurus. Again, not a dinosaur, but it's an extinct crocodile-like, there's all kinds of varieties of crocodile-like creatures that were fossilized, and crocodiles that look like today's crocodiles fossilized right alongside their cousins. But anyway, that's what Thoracosaurus was, excavated from New Jersey there, compared to modern croc. So here's an example of what we're talking about. And I would say this, in answer to my wife's good question, it's basically rotten bits of the blood vessels that are left. It's kind of, that's all that's left. So it's relatively fresh. And I would say this, it's fresh enough to go into hot dogs. You know what goes into hot dogs. Chicken lips and sphincters. So we get to use this super cool microscope called cross-polarized light microscope, and regions of this dinosaur bone that we have polished thin that turn from gold to blue or vice versa, blue back to gold. Those regions have collagen still in them. That's our interpretation that we just got published in the journal Analytical Spectroscopy. In these purple bits here, where they don't have any color change, it's just sort of lavendery, that's where the light has been extinguished. And so those are areas where we think the collagen has all rotted away. So, but the thing is, after 1 million years, there should be no indication of the 35 different techniques, separately done analytical techniques, applied over the last 25 years to all these fossils from all over the world. And they keep finding collagen, collagen, collagen. And this is another one of those techniques. This bit here is calcite that has precipitated inside the pore spaces of the bone. So I could tell, see, these are cracks in the bone. I can tell this is a fossil bone because of the cracks. But I can tell it still has original bone material with some of the biological stuff in there still to this day. So those are some of the exciting results, and that's yet to be published. But I'm working on that paper because that's my video that I took. And you get to see it. So, what we need is technical journal articles that graduate to showing videos instead of black and white stills. But I digress. What did Jesus say to the Pharisees about marriage? But billions of years after the Big Bang, God made them male and female. No, he didn't say that. He said, from the beginning, we've got male and female. Who were the male and the female? Adam and Eve, right there from the beginning. And the two shall be one flesh. By the way, that's a quote from Genesis chapter 2. God made the male and female is a quote from Genesis chapter 1. So Jesus himself is directly quoting from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 as though they convey straightforward history. And who am I to come along and say, Genesis 1 is wrong, Genesis 2 is wrong, because these evolutionists have their worldview straightened out completely, and in fact now I have to say Jesus was wrong. The problem with that is Jesus was kind of like God, and he kind of like knows everything. And so I'm going to go now with what the Lord Jesus said all along. The fifth and final, and I've got no time for it, is radiocarbon decay. We have radiocarbon analyzed, not exactly carbon dating, but we send these to a carbon dating lab because there's a half-life, which gives us a shelf life of a maximum of 100,000 years being generous. And after these theoretical number of carbon years, which don't exactly correspond to calendar years in a lot of cases, but after 100,000 supposed years, you should have no radiocarbon left. It should have all turned itself into nitrogen long before 100,000 years would have elapsed. So if I find radiocarbon in a carbonaceous material, then what do I conclude? It must be fewer than 100,000 years old, okay? And so if this was deposited in Noah's flood 4,500 years ago, does that fit? Yeah, it's fewer than 100,000. And it refutes the tens of thousands and tens of millions of assigned ages that our colleagues, our mainstream colleagues, assert for these fossils. So here is a hadrosaur vertebra. Did we find radiocarbon in it? Well, yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be showing it. We found it in the left brow horn core of a triceratops that our colleagues excavated. Left brow horn core. We found radiocarbon there. We even found it in my favorite dinosaur, Diplodocus, on display at the Carnegie, right there. And we had a little fragment of it that a lab worker let us use, and we sent it off to the lab, and sure enough, radiocarbon still in that one. Wow. And we found some in Stegosaurus. Some of you know the dino names. Others need to buy our dino books and learn the dino names. Yeah. We even found one, and this is fun to say. Everyone say Psittacosaurus. And we thought maybe this is just a North American phenomenon. So we got a piece of Chinese dinosaur, and we sent it to the lab, and sure enough, we found radiocarbon in a Chinese dinosaur. But that is consistent with what our researchers and with what mainstream researchers have been finding in coal. Coal, with age assignments of 240 million years, plenty of radiocarbon still in the coal. They're looking for machine blanks, something that is supposed to have no radiocarbon in it, and they can't find an Earth material that has no radiocarbon in it that they can use to zero their machine blank. So they have to adjust the parameters on their instrument, the AMS instrument that they use for radiocarbon dating. We're not trying to do dating with it. We're just trying to see if there's any radiocarbon measurable with the instrumentation that we have. Sure enough, we found it, they published it. These secularists in radiocarbon, we published ours in a book that you can access for free online at icr.org/RATE. RATE, that was our big project, the RATE project. Radioisotopes and the Age of the Earth is what it stands for. Free books, free articles right there online. We were the first to think, diamonds are made of pure carbon, and maybe we should analyze diamonds to see if there's radiocarbon. And we found measurable levels of radiocarbon, even in diamonds that are supposed to be this diamond has been underground for 3 billion years, and now it can be yours for $3 million. So it's been waiting, what, 3 billion years? And it has radiocarbon in it? Something's fishy. I think the ages are wrong. I think the Bible got it right. I think the earth is recently designed and recently flooded, relatively recently. And this fits Romans 1:20. His invisible attributes, his eternal power and his divine nature, his godness, his outside of this worldness, have been clearly seen ever since billions of years after the creation of the world. No, right since the creation of the world, where we already have Adam and Eve right there to perceive and see his invisible attributes right from creation. So let me end with this. For if you believe Moses, said the Lord Jesus to the Pharisees, this is where it hits home, guys, because we are entering a world that will scoff at you if you believe this book. You've got to be ready. You've got to be prepared for their answers, for their questions, and be prepared to ask them questions. For if you believe Moses, you Pharisees, you would believe me. If you believed Moses, if you believed, by the way, Moses is responsible for the Pentateuch, right? And what's the first book that's in the Pentateuch? Genesis. Moses responsible for that as well. For if you believe Genesis, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. There, Genesis chapter 3, he wrote about me. The seed of the woman will destroy the serpent. But if you do not believe Genesis, my words aren't going to make much sense to you, are they? So we have a long way to go, because we live in a world that's not convinced that Genesis has anything reasonable to say to us. And so it's hard for them to understand the gospel, okay? So we have a lot of work to do. We have to, Paul talks about sowing, watering, and we need to sow the seed, preach the gospel. We need to water it and encourage people to think about the gospel. But when they have questions, we need to say, let me help you find some answers. That's how we care about folks. We help them find answers. And I have 7 announcements that help you find answers. If I was going to give you the perfect number of announcements, how many would I give you? 7. Of course. We have on the table devotions, daily devotions. I even write some of these. What a privilege. Days of Praise. It's a short devotion. You've heard of Our Daily Bread? Days of Praise. Announcement number 2. We have a graduate school called the ICR School of Biblical Apologetics. If you're interested in a graduate school where you could learn biblical apologetics from a creation perspective, grab a brochure. We have YouTubes. I'm on the YouTubes. So if you want to just consume our content, just go to our YouTube channel. And if you don't know what the channel is, grab a card off the table. We at ICR are coming back to, what state are we in? Tennessee. Come check us out. We'll be on August 6th in Chattanooga, celebrating 100 years of monkey business. We're debunking the Scopes trial. If you want to come see me and other ICR scientists, bring your fam, and get the details from this little paper right here. Announcement number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I may have more than 7. I wrote this booklet, Dinosaurs in the Bible, and we have some left. The Creation Basics and Beyond, there's only 4 left. I'm pretty sure those are going to go, but we have lots of these left. And I just wanted to plug it one more time because it's been really useful. I had one lady, so we had these distributed among 17,000 grocery stores in the choice books book rack, and so people just picked these up and read them, thinking, Dinosaurs in the Bible? That shouldn't go together. And I had a lady come to an event where I was speaking, and she said, can I get a picture with you? Because I read your book, and it totally changed the way I think. And now she's a biblical creationist because she read this book. And I said, picture with me? Pfft, of course, I would be happy to. And we have copies of this as well, Clearly Seen, Constructing Solid Arguments for Design. This is where we find the practical helps to get you guys equipped to have conversations. This helps with that, written by our president, Dr. Galuza. I do think it's a groovy resource as well. And then Living in Light of Genesis, I've already told you about, and I appreciate you guys buying copies of this, but I just wanted to say a few things about it as well. All of these books that we produce, the Dinosaurs in the Bible is produced by Harvest House, so not that one, but the books that we publish, we also have as electronic books. So ebooks, we have everything as ebooks. You just have to go to our web store, icr.org/store, and then you pick the product and you scroll way down and it's hidden in tiny font, blue letters. I want the ebook. Click, and you can get that as well. We even have this as an audio book, and it's our first audio book, Living in Light of Genesis. Reasons why we should take Genesis at face value and benefits to us when we do so, both from society as well as family and personally, living in light of Genesis. You can listen to more of my sultry voice. Announcement number 7B. These are actually free, and we don't want to have to take these home with us. So the ones that are on the rack, on display, just grab one for mom and dad, grab as many of you as you want. Same with Days of Praise, Acts and Facts. Please take those so we don't have to take them with me. It has been a joy to be with you guys. Thank you so much.